The most painful truth in Princess Margaret's final days was not hidden in a state document, a scandalous photograph, or a public confession. It was hidden in a private drawer at Kensington Palace, inside a small bundle of letters she had avoided for nearly half a century. By then, the glamorous princess the world once watched with fascination had grown quiet. Her health had been weakened by a series of strokes. Her movements were slower. Her voice was softer. The rooms around her felt heavy with memory. Yet the people closest to her understood that the deepest struggle was not only in her body. It was in the past she could no longer keep locked away. In those final months, Princess Margaret began to return again and again to one name. Peter Townsend. He was Group Captain Peter Townsend, the man she had loved with a force that royal duty could not erase. The palace had once presented their separation as a dignified sacrifice. The public had been told that Margaret had chosen duty, composure, and the demands of the crown. But in the silence of her final days, another truth came back into the room. She had never truly healed. To understand why those letters carried such devastating weight, we have to return to the beginning of Margaret's life. She was born into privilege, surrounded by tradition, protocol, and the rituals of the British crown. Yet from childhood, she stood in the shadow of her elder sister, Princess Elizabeth, the future Queen Elizabeth. Elizabeth represented steadiness, responsibility, and the future of the monarchy. Margaret represented brightness with charm and a kind of restless modern spirit that seemed too alive for the narrow corridors of royal expectation. As a young woman, Margaret became one of the most captivating figures in Britain. She was elegant, sharp, and magnetic. The press followed her every movement. The public admired her glamour. In drawing rooms, at official events, and behind palace gates, she appeared to carry the confidence of someone born for attention. But that glittering image concealed a more complicated heart. Every royal gesture was watched. Every friendship was interpreted. Every romance became a matter of public discussion. For Margaret, private longing was never truly private. Her life belonged to the monarchy before it belonged to herself. Then Peter Townsend entered the center of her story. He was older, respected, and deeply connected to the royal household. To Margaret, he became more than a companion. He became the life she imagined for herself beyond duty. Their connection carried tenderness, hope, and the dangerous possibility of freedom. In him she saw not only love, but a future in which she could be seen as a woman, not only as a princess. But the monarchy demanded sacrifice. Peter Townsend had a past that made the relationship unacceptable to the old rules surrounding the crown. The institution was built on image stability and obedience to tradition. Margaret's love was treated not as a personal matter, but as a threat to the order that surrounded her family. The choice before her was brutal. Follow her heart and risk a break with the world that had formed her. Step away from Peter Townsend and preserve the expectations placed upon her by birth. In the end, Margaret stepped away. To the outside world, the decision was framed with grace. A princess had accepted duty. A woman had surrendered desire for the sake of the crown. The palace could continue to tell its story of dignity and restraint. But inside Margaret, the decision left a wound that never fully closed. The years that followed did not erase it. Her public image changed. Her marriage faltered. Her private life became the subject of fascination and judgment. She remained proud, stylish, sharp, and defiant, but those who knew her sensed that something had dimmed. The bright young woman who once seemed to challenge the entire rhythm of palace life had become someone carrying the weight of what might have been. Decades passed. The letters remained locked away. By the final season of her life, Kensington Palace had grown quieter around her. The rooms were familiar, but the atmosphere had changed. Her health had been damaged by repeated strokes. Each one seemed to take away another part of the vitality that had once defined her. She spent long stretches in silence, looking through windows, pausing between sentences, and drifting into memories that others could only guess at. Those close to her noticed that the past had begun to call louder than the present. One afternoon, with pale winter light falling across her private room, Margaret asked a trusted attendant to bring a small collection of personal belongings from a cabinet. It was not a grand royal archive. It was not an official record. It was something far more intimate. Inside were photographs, fragments of memory, and handwritten letters that had survived long after the life they described had vanished. At the top of the bundle were letters from Peter Townsend. For many years, Margaret had avoided them. She knew what they contained. She knew the voice that would rise from the pages. She knew that to open them was to step back into the most painful crossroads of her life. But in her final days, with time growing fragile, she reached for them. Witnesses later remembered the silence in the room as she unfolded the first page. There was no public audience, no palace announcement, no formal ceremony. Only an aging princess holding a letter from the man she had once hoped to marry. Her hands the words trembled. Seemed to pull her out of the present and place her once more in the life that had been denied. The letters were not described as scandalous. Their power came from something quieter. They revealed tenderness. They revealed hope. They revealed the ordinary human future Margaret had once believed might be hers. The palace had spent decades treating the separation as a matter of duty, but the letters made clear that it had also been a private devastation. As she read, Margaret sometimes paused and closed her eyes. At moments, she whispered Peter's name. Those in the room understood that they were not watching nostalgia. They were watching grief return with all the force of something unfinished. These were not tears for a recent wound. They were tears for an old one reopened. The truth was simple, and that simplicity made it devastating. Princess Margaret had spent much of her life surrounded by jewels, titles, ceremonies, and attention. Yet none of it had erased the memory of the man she had been forced to leave behind. The crown had shaped her life, but it had not protected her heart. As the days passed, the letters became a quiet presence in the palace. Their rediscovery stirred discomfort among those around her. Not because they threatened a new public scandal, but because they revealed something the monarchy had never been eager to confront. Duty had not simply guided Margaret, it had cost her. Inside Kensington Palace, some members of the household felt deep sympathy. They saw a woman near the end of life, facing the emotional consequences of a decision. Others remained bound to the old language of the institution. They still saw sacrifice as necessary. They still believed the crown had to come first. But Margaret's final days made that belief harder to hold without question. She was no longer only the dazzling royal figure of earlier decades. She was a woman sitting with the life she had lived and the life she had lost. During those final days, Margaret often withdrew into silence. She looked out from her private suite as if searching for something just beyond reach. When she did speak, her words circled back to the same themes. Freedom, the past, the love she had given up, the choices that had been made in the name of the monarchy, the future that had disappeared before it could become real. The people around her sensed that she was measuring her life not by public appearances, but by private absences. For the public, Princess Margaret had long been a symbol of rebellious glamour. She was remembered as the royal who carried herself with confidence, who attracted attention, who seemed to live with a boldness that separated her from the colder image of palace restraint. But the truth revealed in her final days added another layer to that image. Her defiance had not been only style. It had been the response of a woman who had paid dearly for obedience. Her story forced a question that still echoes whenever people speak about the monarchy. How much should a person give up for duty? How much private pain can be hidden behind public service? And when the crown asks for sacrifice, who carries the cost after the applause fades? Margaret's life did not fit neatly into the story the palace preferred. She was not simply a rebel. She was not simply a victim. She was proud, difficult, charming, wounded, dazzling, and deeply human. She understood the world she belonged to, but she also understood what that world had taken from her. The letters from Peter Townsend gave shape to that loss. They were more than paper. They were evidence of a life that had almost happened, a marriage that had never come, a future that had been imagined, discussed, and then quietly buried. For nearly half a century, those letters had waited in silence while Margaret continued the performance required of her. Only near the end did she allow herself to listen to them again. By the morning of February the 9th, 2002, Princess Margaret's long struggle had reached its final moment. She passed away quietly, leaving behind a legacy that was both brilliant and fragile. Her death marked the end of a life lived under the brightest lights and inside the deepest shadows of the royal world. Those who had seen her in her last days spoke of a soft calm that seemed to settle over her. It was as if confronting the old letters had allowed her to face the truth she had carried for so long. Not erase it, not change it, but finally look at it without turning away. When news of Margaret's passing reached Queen Elizabeth, the loss carried a weight beyond public duty. Elizabeth had lost her only sister. The two women had shared childhood war years, royal training family, burdens, private disagreements, and a destiny neither of them had chosen. For the Queen, Margaret's death was not only the death of a sibling, it was the quiet closing of a chapter that had begun before the crown came between them and the rest of the world. According to the story told in the transcript, Queen Elizabeth remained silent for several minutes after hearing the news. That silence said what royal language could not. It contained grief memory and the awareness that an entire era had slipped away. Across the United Kingdom, tributes began to gather. The public remembered Margaret's beauty, style, spirit, and unapologetic individuality. They remembered the parties, the photographs, the elegance, and the controversy. But beneath those familiar images, a more fragileness. Understanding began to emerge. Princess Margaret had not only been a glamorous royal, she had been a woman shaped by love loss and decisions made under the pressure of a crown she could never fully escape. Her final days changed the way her story was heard. The hidden truth was not that she had loved Peter Townsend. That much had long been known. The deeper truth was that the love had never fully left her. The decision that once seemed sealed by duty remained alive inside her until the end. The palace could close doors. It could manage statements. It could preserve tradition, but it could not command the heart to forget. That is why the letters mattered. They brought Margaret back to the most defining choice of her life. They revealed the human cost behind the polished language of royal sacrifice. They showed that behind the jewels, the titles, and the public image was a woman who had carried one unanswered question for decades. What would her life have been if she had been allowed to choose love? The answer never came. What remained was memory. A drawer, a bundle of letters, a name whispered in a quiet room. A princess nearing the end, reading the words of the man she had once believed would be her future. And through that image, the grandeur of the monarchy suddenly looked smaller than the grief of one human heart. Princess Margaret's story endures because it is not only about royalty, it is about the price of obedience. It is about the ache of a path not taken. It is about the way a single choice can echo across decades, shaping marriages, reputations, silences, and final reflections. The palace may have seen duty as survival. Margaret's final days revealed another truth. Survival can still leave scars. By the end, she had become more than the glittering sister of Queen Elizabeth, more than a symbol of glamour, more than a rebellious figure in royal history. She became a reminder that even those born inside palaces can be imprisoned by expectation. Even those surrounded by ceremony can be lonely. Even those praised for sacrifice can spend a lifetime grieving what they gave away. Her final moments were not marked by spectacle. They were marked by reflection. The letters once sealed away had opened more than a drawer. They had opened the central wound of her life. And when Princess Margaret died on February the 9th, 2002, she left behind more than memories of beauty and scandal. She left behind a warning hidden inside a royal life. A crown can demand loyalty. It can demand silence. It can demand sacrifice. But it cannot erase love. It cannot rewrite regret. And it cannot protect the people who wear it from the quiet sorrow of what might have been.